All right, back to news. The SABC says it's facing its own day zero. Speaking in Parliament today, members of the executive and the board said that the money may completely run out by the end of the financial year next March. Board member Mathatha Tsedu has said by February the SABC might not be able to pay full salaries, and by March, if nothing changes, it could be day zero and the SABC might not be able to pay salaries at all. Meanwhile, the SABC has met with organised labour at the first meeting facilitated by the mediation body, the CCMA, today. That relates, of course, to the planned retrenchments at the broadcaster. If the SABC has its way, almost 1,000 permanent staff may be affected, and the contracts of 1,200 freelancers may not be renewed. To discuss, we're now joined on the line by the SABC Group Executive of HR, Jonathan Thekiso. Mr. Thekiso, thank you for being with us. How did the meeting go today? Some reports suggesting that it was just an information sharing exercise.
I think, good evening. I think it's a positive development that the parties were able to get together in what we believe to be a joint consensus-seeking process. I think it must be understood that even though the organization is in dire financial straits right now, it's important that we proceed with the meetings, the first of which was held today, to try and find ways and means through which the retrenchments can either be avoided or minimized. I think the important thing is that also that there was an exchange of documentation today, and I'm told that there was an agreement in the meeting today that the documentation that was shared today will also be sent electronically. It's important for that, that information that was shared with unions, so that they can go through the information that the organization is putting across to make everybody understand as to the main reasons that the organization is going through this process. And the issue, just to add, the issue of financial difficulties is now on record, in terms of where the organization is. But long story short, it's a positive development that the parties were able to meet today so that we can begin the path of beginning to meet each other around this very, very difficult phase in the history of the SABC.
Isn't this just a formality, though? If there's absolutely no money, which it sounds like we're heading in that direction, how can retrenchments be avoided?
I think that this is it's not a formality from the point of view that whilst we were busy with this process, it must be understood that it was very clear in Parliament today, the parliamentarians coming out quite strongly around the fact that the funding model of the SABC also needs to be looked at. But secondly, there was a view which was articulated that the political principles also need to be engaged in terms of how the SABC can find its way out of the financial difficulty that it finds itself. So, on one hand, we are very clear that the issue of financial dire straits is on record, but on the other hand, our politicians are also very concerned about the financial status of the ANC, of the SABC, and that being the case, they are also looking at other ways and means in terms of how the funding model or the funding of the SABC, as it were, can also be looked at. So this is not a formality. I think from the point of view of compliance with the Section 189, it's a must that we have to go through this process. But be that as it may, there's also a very clear concern from the politicians in terms of the funding model of the SABC.
Does that mean we're getting closer to a bailout?
I wouldn't say that we're getting closer to a bailout. All I'm saying is that the debate, the narrative around the funding of the SABC, is proceeding within Parliament. Based on what we, the executives of the SABC, were able to present in Parliament today. So from our presentation, it became very clear to the politicians that, as you quite rightly said in your opening, come the beginning of February, the SABC might find itself in a very difficult position in terms of payment of salaries. So I'm not saying that there's any bailout being mooted. All I'm saying is that the debate is ongoing within Parliament in terms of looking at how SABC can be funded.
I understand, Mr. Thekiso. Presumably, if there is some sort of bailout, there will be salaries, but will there still be retrenchments? I mean, if there is this glut of lower managers, as has been painted, something still has to be done, right? Even though there might, please don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that there's going to be a bailout, but in the event there is, the bottom line is that the SABC also needs to look at its structure. It needs to look at how we've configured particular jobs. It needs to look at how we deal with duplications in certain instances around particular jobs. We need to look at how some jobs have been fragmented to a point where a job that's supposed to be done by one person is actually done by 2 people or 3 people. So the issue of restructuring the SABC will always be top on the agenda, even though there might be, some kind of funding. Issue of restructuring the SABC still needs to be on the agenda. There have been concerns raised that there's been no real skills audit, just a cursory check in each department who can go. Is that the way how to manage? Is that a way to manage this process?
Look, the issue of a skills audit is not a precondition for Section 189. But what I can tell you is that a skills audit was done in 2013, end of 2013. And there might be a view that says that 2013 is dated. And we say, no, it's not dated in a sense that the recommendations coming from the consulting firm that did the skills audit, which was PwC, said that it will take 5 years, for the recommendations to be implemented. But what were the findings? The key findings were that there was a shortage of critical skills, particularly your technical skills, particularly your digitization skills, as well as what they view to be critical skills, things like your communication skills, sales skills, as well as customer management skills. So all those things were identified in the skills audit. And, since 2013, there's been some means in terms of bridging that gap. And shall I say that we have not succeeded in the sense that somewhere through the process, there's been financial constraints in terms of implementation of the recommendation of the skills audit. So it's not dated. And let me make this other point as well. It's not dated in the sense that if you look at the attrition rate of the SABC, it's sitting somewhere at 4.4%, which means that in the past financial year, only 4.4% of the total staff complement were able to leave the organization, which is in the region of about 140 or so employees. So in terms of attrition, the SABC employees, their tenure is somewhere in the region of 10 to 15 years, which means people within the SABC do not leave. And this makes the skills audit done in 2013 still relevant today.
All right, I understand. Thank you very much. That was the SABC Head of Human Resources, Jonathan Thekiso. The SABC warning of its own day zero possibly coming in the first part of next year.